Dr. Sandra Miller of Complete Hearing in Lincoln joins me this morning on KFOR for The Conversation Starts Here. Complete-hearing.com is your source for much more information and where you can hear this conversation again and past Better Hearing Conversations with Dr. Miller. Every Saturday we focus on the health of your hearing. Good morning, Dr. Miller.
Good morning. Nice to be back today.
Weather is starting to cooperate. Thank you, Mother Nature, showing us some budding trees and some lush green lawns, and soon the bees will be back, but so will the allergies, and that's our subject today. Explain how allergies and what they do to an ear impacts our hearing.
Absolutely. So I just noticed that with all the things that are happening in the change of season, and some people are very prone to allergies, some have subtle symptoms. I was teasing you earlier that I think that I never had allergies until I moved to Nebraska, and I think if you're here long enough, your nose just starts to run, I don't know, maybe randomly. So one thing I want to talk about today is just the allergy symptoms that you might be having and how that can really play into your ears becoming plugged. So I think today we'll just talk about when the ears get plugged and allergies. We're going to tie that together, and then other things that really cause your ears to plug and how can we help that. So we're going to talk about the anatomy first today. Why do my ears get plugged? So there's something called your eustachian tube. It's located near the back of your nose, and it connects your middle ear to your throat. And its purpose is simply to equalize the pressure in your middle ear. So I want you to think about when you fly on an airplane and when you get that really plugged feeling, it's because the pressure on the outside and the pressure in your middle ear are not equal, and that's why you get that plugged feeling. What's nice about your eustachian tube is it naturally opens and closes when you chew or when you swallow. So naturally it's opening and closing all day, and it's keeping that middle ear nice and balanced for airspace. What's interesting is the lining of the eustachian tube is the same as the sinuses and as the nose. And so when allergies and sinus infections start to flare up, you can imagine that that lining swells. And so that eustachian tube, what will happen is it will become more closed. And so naturally the air in the middle ear space is not being ventilated. And that's why your ear feels kind of plugged. And so that's how it's kind of tied to allergies. It's just that inflammation of that lining. And so it's happening in our nose and in our sinuses, but it's also happening in that tube that ventilates the middle ear. And that's why it feels plugged up. So there's other things that can actually affect this too. So I want you to think about, we talked about being in an airplane. So even when you maybe are driving through the mountains in Colorado and you notice how your ears plug up, same concept, sinus infection. So those are things where the ears get plugged because that system where that eustachian tube is not ventilating correctly will cause your ears to feel plugged. And if they stay plugged long enough, what will happen is you'll develop fluid in your middle ear. So if you end up developing fluid in the middle ear, that's going to cause some things that maybe your ear feels even more full. There are a couple of things that cause your ear to feel plugged that might not be tied to that eustachian tube, and that can simply be earwax. We've talked a lot about earwax before and what happens with that. And maybe a final thing that maybe makes your ear feel plugged is like a sudden hearing loss. You wake up and you just can't hear, and your ear will feel plugged with that as well. So when you have this plugged feeling, we need to get to the bottom of what might be causing it.
You had my attention when you said my ear went all the way behind my nose.
Yes.
Did not realize that.
Yes. Behind your nose, kind of in your upper throat, we call that area the nasopharynx. And that's where that eustachian tube ties into. So I think our body is so uniquely made. When you think about when I swallow or yawn or chew, that this just opens and closes, and this pressure equalization just happens naturally. Mm-hmm. But when you start to get these other symptoms and those linings start to swell, is when you start to notice, oh, my ears are just plugged today. So I think it's so interesting that how our body just dynamically works.
Help me understand plugged. Now, earwax, that's a substance. I can visually see, yeah, it's plugged. It's blocking a canal. But elevation, for example, and yawning seems to unplug. Help me understand what's going on in there.
Great. So we talked about how naturally when you chew and when you swallow, what happens, those are kind of the solutions to the ear being plugged. So if you swallow and yawn, what happens is air is going from that eustachian tube and being pushed back into the middle ear space. So when it opens back up, it equalizes the pressure. Well, imagine when that's not opening and closing as naturally as it should because that lining is swollen and the pressure's not equalized. You have to end up forcing the air into that middle ear space to make it feel unplugged. I often tell my patients your eardrum is like a thin piece of paper. And what happens when the pressure is not equal from the outside to the inside because that tube on the middle ear is not functioning is that that piece of paper gets kind of sucked in or retracted. And it starts to feel kind of like the ear is just plugged. And so when we swallow, we push air into the middle ear or we yawn. That will allow that pressure to equalize. So those are two ways to kind of get that to solve. The other way is something we call the valve maneuver, and that just means you're going to simply plug your nose and blow with your mouth closed. And what that does is, again, it pushes air from the eustachian tube up into that middle ear space. It opens that up and pushes the eardrum back out, and it makes it more natural in terms of popping the ear. So people say, well, sometimes my ears pop when I swallow and chew, and that's because that air is being pushed up into the middle ear. So when we valve, we just plug our nose and blow with our mouth closed, and that usually does the trick. Another one is called the Lowry method, where you would plug your nose and swallow is another way to do this. And there's other things you can do. Over the counter, you can buy something called Eustachi. It's another way to push that air through the nasal cavity and open up that space. And then sometimes your primary care physician or an ENT physician may say, hey, you know what, an oral decongestant would be a good idea for you as well.
If we were on Zoom, viewers would have seen me holding my nose and closing my mouth, doing exactly what you were instructing people to do.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people always ask me about flying. I'm so concerned when I fly and my ears pop. What can I do for that? And I have the same problem. My eardrums don't move very easily. So when I fly, I always take an oral decongestant before I get on the airplane, and I constantly have like a bottle of water with me, and I'm yawning and swallowing, just trying to keep my ear not plugging up. Because I've been in a situation where I didn't have the ability to do that. And boy, by the time I landed, my ear was full for an entire day where I just couldn't get my ear to pop back open. So it's just something to think about when you have those symptoms. And when people start to have these symptoms, especially during allergy season, some of those strategies are just some of the things I'd recommend you do. Swallow, yawn, drink some water, plug your nose and blow.
I'm a fortunate one to not be suffering from allergies, but there are plenty of people here at the radio station and around me that do, and they associate it with a nose thing. So in this conversation, which deals with hearing and ears, how much of the nose do you, as an ear specialist, a hearing specialist, have to know?
You know, it's not one of our primary focuses in terms of do we focus on the nose in terms of anatomy and learning about those types of things. I would say my knowledge of nose and things like that are more limited. Mm-hmm. Just knowing that the lining of the eustachian tube, which affects the middle ear, definitely is the same lining that's in the sinuses. So we know things that correlate to each other. So when people come to me and say, you know, Dr. Miller, I have a sinus infection, my ears feel really plugged, well, then I definitely know, okay, that's because of X, you know, so that I know the correlations between the two systems for sure. I don't have an in-depth, detailed knowledge of nose and sinus types of things.
For people wearing hearing devices and have allergies, do adjustments need to be made by a professional rather than me just sitting watching TV and holding my nose and blowing out? Are there things that you as a professional can adjust to compensate for my allergies?
That's such a really good question, because I tell my patients during this time of the season, they're wondering if it's them or if it's their hearing aid that's not working. So when they get this full feeling, they're not quite sure which piece to address. So we always make sure the devices are working well, and then we tell them, when you're having this fuller feeling, I want you to use all those strategies we talked about, swallowing, yawning, valve, Lowry. But then we also say, in the times when it's plugged up, just turn the volume up. It's a temporary, typically, problem. We can use the volume control, or we can actually set up a secondary program for them to use during those times when they're feeling a little more plugged up.
You can find out more information by going to complete-hearing.com. You can learn the basics, or you can attempt to get in touch with the professionals at Complete Hearing. even in the new way in which we are living, because Complete Hearing has made some adjustments. Talk about the clinic.
Absolutely. I can encourage your listeners to do check us out on Facebook or on the website. We are continually monitoring and abiding by state recommendations. The governor is recommending maybe we can start seeing patients again, or maybe open up our clinic to see patients again on May 4th. So what's happening on the backside of Complete Hearing is we are very much preparing for that to be a very safe environment for you to come in. We are going to be doing some things that we haven't done before. So we are going to be telling our patients this might look a little different than what you're used to. Just like everybody's used to when you're out and about now, I went to Trader Joe's this last week, and how they're having you stand in a certain position and the shields are up in terms of the plexiglass shield. While coronavirus is still very active around our state, we want to make sure that we're diligent. And so what you're going to see when you come back into the clinic is a little bit of a different change, and we'll talk more about that next week. We continue to have curbside service, drop-off and pickup. We're still answering the phone, sending out supplies at no cost. We're doing telehealth. We'll talk more about that next week as well. So there's many things still going on that we're still connecting with our patients and making sure that they're taken care of. And we're serving anybody in Nebraska. So if you have a need, Complete Hearing is ready to serve you, even though it's in a different way.
And the email, Dr. Miller, hello@complete-hearing.com for immediate hearing needs?
Yes, either give us an email for sure. That is monitored every single day as well, and as well as giving us a phone call. Our phones are answered every day as well. Every work day, I should say, Monday through Friday.
You may get Kim. Kim picked up the phone at the office when I called to get in touch with Dr. Miller. So you may hear the friendly voice of Kim when you call the clinic. All right, complete-hearing.com. Hear this conversation again. There is a podcast tab on Complete Hearing's website. You can hear this conversation and catch up on other interesting hearing conversations too with Dr. Miller, because every Saturday morning we're here. The conversation starts here. Have a good weekend, Dr. Miller.
You too. Thank you, Dale.